uns nicht in Versuchung, sondern erlöse uns von dem Übel. Denn dein ist das Reich und die Kraft und die Herrlichkeit in Ewigkeit. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, it is really wonderful to be able to worship in one's mother tongue, in the language from the old world. I'm going to pass out a timeline. This is my bit of mathematics here. Actually, I have a number line that we're going to be looking at, so take one of those and pass them on. And there are actually 4 different groupings here. Now, not just that, but when I teach the history of mathematics, or taught the history of mathematics, I would emphasize number, space, which I heard Jerry talking about this morning, and structure. So I'm going to be, I'm right in my element here, I guess, number, space, and structure. Only this is really not a mathematics talk. This is indeed a structural history of St. James, and I entitled it Building for Worship. Now it's in the early 1700s that we find quite a few waves of Germans from the Palatinate region in southwestern Germany who find their way into Pennsylvania and move westward and indeed settle in many areas, including Gettysburg. The sort of original definitive work of the history of mathematics was done by J.B. Baker in 1921. And Baker sort of gives the definition of the formation of St. James as 1789, right at the birth of our country. And we had a 200-year celebration in 1989. And in fact, for that celebration, Roger Goebel, many of you will remember Roger Goebel with Elaine Matthews, produced this little history, Living in the Light of St. James, that called into question a bit of the actual facts that are present in Baker's claim. And there are not really historical documents that verify that. A lot of that's conjecture. We do have, however, some appearance of about maybe 1802, at least by 1802, the Lutherans are gathered here in Gettysburg, and they want a church building, but they can't do it alone. There are also German Reforms, individuals, a German Reformed congregation that together with the Lutherans, they get together and decide that they want to have a subscription for building a new common building. This happened a lot, called union churches, that Lutheran and German Reformed would kind of get together. 1803, they had a subscription that did not meet its goal. However, they were able to purchase a plot of land, the corner of High Street and East Street. Now, those residents of Gettysburg, do you know where East Street is? That's actually nowadays called Stratton. So this was High Street and Stratton, the corner of High Street and Stratton. They bought a lot there. Actually, there's a church on that lot these days. It's called Trinity UCC Church, and it's at High and Stratton. Well, then in 1811, they put out another subscription to try and get more money to actually build a church, and they were in fact successful in doing that. And they built their Union Church at that corner of High and East Streets, or Stratton as it is today. However, in the interim, they started to worship in the courthouse. Now, the courthouse had just been completed in the center square of Gettysburg, called the Diamond, the Adams County Courthouse, and that's where the Lutherans first worshipped. It was a larger space that they could worship in. But it wasn't then until 1814, that the Union Church building was completed and was consecrated. And at the dedication or consecration on October 16th, now there was a person by the name, one amongst the dignitaries that were there, was a John George Schmucker. Now, you all know of his son, the famous Samuel Simon Schmucker. Well, this John was also very prominent, and we have record in the newspaper, actually called this church, this Union Church, St. James. So that was the sort of first inclination of that. But the name was not really used a lot. It was more the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Gettysburg, or the Union Church, that was referring to that. Then, during that time after the Union Church building, they didn't have a pastor of their own, as of course you are likely aware. There were itinerant preachers that would come around and preach, or a pastor from a nearby parish, say Taneytown, might come and hold a service in the building. Now in the Union Church, that wasn't our own building. That we shared that. We shared that with German Reform. And so, when you share something, okay, they get half the Sundays, we get half the Sundays, St. James and the Lutherans had half the Sundays. And in our half of the Sundays, one of those Sundays, we would preach in English and one in German. So we would continue our German connection, but also we have to pay attention to the young people. The young people, of course, are growing up in an English-speaking area, although at home they might speak German. And it wasn't until 1819 that Johann Herbst, or John Herbst, was the first resident pastor. Now, some of you may recognize his name. Anybody? Maybe not. He was on the early board. He was instrumental in the founding of the seminary in 1826. He was on the board. He was one who strongly advocated for the location of that seminary to be at Gettysburg. And he was also the pastor at this the Lutheran portion congregation at the Union Church. He also had a couple other parishes at that time. I mean, you didn't just preach at one place. Flores Church, many of you are acquainted in the area, the Arntsville Church was also. He was here for 9 years, and then a Frederick Rudolph was pastor. I don't have him marked down. But the significance there is that after the seminary was formed, the faculty wanted to be able to preach to the students in English. This was English. The seminary was in English. Wanted to be able to preach to the students in English. And, I mean, St. James, just one service a month in English, it was really not enough. So in 1836, we have a group of members from St. James, as well as the seminary faculty, formed a Christ Lutheran Church, which undoubtedly many of you are familiar with. And that building is sort of the oldest building that's been continuously, I think, as a place of worship in Gettysburg. So that allowed faculty members to preach in English. The pastor, actually, though, was still the pastor of St. James. And this was like a sister. This was not a split or a secession. It was very friendly. Pastor Rudolph was pastor there until he retired. And in 1836, Benjamin Keller, I won't go back to, you have on your paper there, Benjamin Keller became pastor of St. James. He was also pastor of Christ Lutheran and the couple of rural parish churches. However, this was getting to be a little much. In 1850, Keller resigned from in 1839, resigned from Christ. And you were on your own. Maybe you know who sort of took over as pastor in 1839. I didn't look that up. In 1850, Keller resigned also from the Flores Church and the Artsville Church so that he could preach at St. James. I guess I better point out that let's see what I'm doing. Sitting on that. In 1840, we have the Sunday school was formed, and also a choir organized. And it was part of this, the Sunday school, St. James wanted to join with the Reformed Church to build a Sunday school building. But they didn't want to. So this was one of the several tensions that began to develop between the Lutherans and the Reforms. They were both getting bigger. They were both getting bigger and sharing this same building over in High and Stratton. And St. James really wanted to pull out. They wanted to go on their own. They were getting big, they wanted to go on their own. They asked to do that, and were not given permission by the Reforms. There was a little bit of a legal issue there. As that legal issue was being worked through, it turned out that the document that the trustees had for forming this Union Church sort of indicated that it had to be the trustees, the power to sell off part or whatever, or buy parts, or was in the hand of the trustees who were now dead. So anyway, there were problems. Here's Keller. Keller was also active in the West Pennsylvania Synod, was the first treasurer of the West Pennsylvania Synod. And he retired resigned in 1851. But before that, we have, in 1846, St. James, as a congregation, applied for and received a charter of incorporation from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And in that document, or in actually council minutes referring to that, we were called the Evangelical Lutheran Congregation of the St. James Church, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So we were definitely St. James. Actually, St. James was also used as the name in the minutes of the Sunday school in 1840 when the Sunday school was formed. So we get our Pennsylvania charter in 1846, and 1848 we have now, we build on the corner of Stratton, East Street, and now York. Oh, that's where we are. We are at York and Stratton. The first building was built there. And as part of that, we purchased a small reed organ. The Sunday school did. It was called a melodeon type organ. And there it is. The cupola was a later addition. It wasn't right away in the 1848. But you see the nice symmetry here on this building that it served quite well for quite a few years, and then let me back up. Yes, okay. Let's go to the 1850s. The Germans, you know, they have children. Their children are speaking English, but of course at home they might speak German. But they were really getting a little restless. They wanted German, more German. German was preached just one Sunday a month. When we got our own building, yes, we had all 4 Sundays of the month to preach, but 3 of them were in English, and only still 1 was in German. So in the latter 50s, 1850s, there was a Professor C.F. Schaefer from the seminary who was paid $25 a year to preach extra sermon, to preach the German services and sort of take charge of the Germans. Then a flap came over about his wearing clerical robes and using the full liturgy. And that caused 35 of the German members of the congregation to pull out. They pulled out and formed another, now this would be 3rd Lutheran Church here in our Gettysburg, St. Paul's German Church. German Lutheran Church was formed, and they worshipped in McConaughey's Hall, which is at the currently the Times building, the old Gettysburg Times building is there, the McConaughey Hall. They worshipped there until finally, for about 6 years, in 1865, they returned. They were welcomed back into Gettysburg. They had not transferred memberships in a formal way, so it was all well to come back. We still, however, have German that was preached on the last Sunday of each month. Yes, there we go. Okay. Then let's look at July of 1863. July of 1863, you know, it was the Battle of Gettysburg. The pastor at St. James was Abraham Essick from 1861 to 64, and he has some interesting accounts of his observations of the battle. However, that's not our topic today, so I'm going to just pass over that, other than to note that there was damage. The church was used as a field hospital, as many of the churches in town were. There was damage of about $2,025. And we sent in the bill to the U.S. government, United States government, and waited. Well, we waited quite a while. 1915, we received a check in the mail for $120.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, all had been done on that and was gone. In 1865, we installed another reed organ, a larger one, a Mason and Hamlin organ. This picture was taken in 1888. You see the choir. This was in the back of the church. And there's the Mason and Hamlin organ. Now, I do point out that this was the early part of 1888 that this picture was taken, because then in 1888, we did a major remodeling of the building. And we're going to see a picture of that. The rededication for that was on August 5th of 1888. The pastor was Joel Swartz. He came in 1881 for 13 years. Joel Swartz, he formed the Christian Endeavor Society in 1889. His wife formed the Women's Missionary Society in 1882. So I'll remind us of what the 1848 building looked like. And look carefully at it. Notice the rectangular windows on the side, and of course the facade. You see a roof here. And now let's move to 1888. Whoa! Whoa, this is a big, big transformation. We have a bell tower instead of a cupola. We have a nice bell tower. Now, put this bell tower in your visual storage memory, because I'm going to ask you to compare that tower with a later tower, so keep that in mind. Obviously a new facade, but you still see the sort of general shape of the roof. There's a small little rose window there. Let's go inside. Whoops, before we go inside, we do have a cornerstone that was kept from the originally 1848. Evangelical Lutheran 48 was remodeled in 1887. They were starting to that model. And here's the interior. Notice the flat ceiling. Remember the rectangular windows? There's the rectangular part, but there was a rounded semicircle at the top. This is a later organ. This is